At 42, Marissa Halden often wondered when her life had slipped out from under her, when the pieces had begun to fall so quickly that she no longer had the strength to catch them, and the first real crack had come 3 years earlier when she lost her job at a mid-sized insurance firm in Columbus, Ohio, after 15 years of loyal work, handed a thin envelope that said, "Position eliminated," as though her entire livelihood, her entire sense of purpose, meant nothing more than a line on a spreadsheet. And she remembered walking out into the parking lot on that cold November afternoon clutching her cardboard box of office plants and half-dried pens, feeling like the wind itself had turned against her, but still trying to keep steady because her daughter, Ava, then 12, was waiting at home and deserved a mother who didn't fall apart at every corner of bad luck. Yet even that resolve cracked 2 months later when she discovered the truth about her husband, Daniel. The man she had built a life with since they were both barely out of their 20s, the man she trusted through every rent hike, every hospital bill, every nightmare scenario, only to find messages on his phone from someone half her age, messages that didn't even bother hiding the affection, the deception, the intimacy that had once belonged to their marriage, and when she confronted him, he didn't deny it, didn't even try to apologize. Instead he told her he felt stuck and needed something new. As though she were an outdated appliance he had grown bored of, and within weeks he was gone, moving in with a woman he'd been cheating with, leaving Marissa with a half-paid mortgage, a car payment already 3 months behind, and the crushing humiliation of explaining to her daughter why her father wouldn't be home for dinner anymore, all while pretending she wasn't breaking internally in ways she didn't know how to fix. The months that followed blurred into a cycle of job applications, interviews that went nowhere, and desperate attempts to stretch the $2,100 she had left in savings, until she found herself standing in line at a payday loan store she once swore she would never step foot in, agreeing to a $950 loan with interest rates she barely understood because all she cared about was keeping the lights on and avoiding another moment of Ava asking, too gently for a teenager, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" But things only worsened when a scam caller posing as a loan relief agent convinced her to send $600, money she didn't even have, money she borrowed from a friend, to fast-track a consolidation plan, only for her to discover days later it was all fake, the number disconnected, the website shuttered, and she remembered sitting on the kitchen floor with her head buried in her arms, crying silently because she didn't want Ava to hear, crying so deeply it felt like something inside her had drained away forever. Yet even in those darkest moments, small lights appeared in places she didn't expect. Her neighbor Rita, a widow in her late 60s who baked when she worried, started leaving casseroles on their porch, just because, and a former coworker, Lena, reconnected with her after hearing about the layoff, offering rides, a listening ear, and even slipping $200 into Marissa's diaper-worn wallet with the excuse that, "Friends don't let friends drown," a kindness that made Marissa sob into her steering wheel after Lena walked away. Even Ava, now 13, showed a kind of quiet resilience that both amazed and broke Marissa, doing extra babysitting jobs to help pay for her own school clothes, leaving little notes on the fridge that said things like, "I love you, Mom," and "We're strong." And it was these small mercies that kept Marissa from collapsing under the weight of the $18,400 debt that clung to her like a shadow, a number that kept her awake at night as she circled due dates in red marker on a calendar already stained with worry. When Marissa finally secured a job, part-time cashiering at a local grocery store for $14.75 an hour, it wasn't glamorous or steady enough to solve everything, but it gave her something to hold on to, a place to be, and coworkers like Jess, a 25-year-old single mom with a loud laugh and a streak of purple hair, who insisted on slipping snack bars into Marissa's tote bag and telling her, "You're doing better than you think," which made Marissa feel, for the first time in months, like she wasn't invisible. But life still had hard hits left to give, an unexpected $1,200 car repair, a medical bill for Ava's sprained wrist, and another scam, this time an online listing for a remote data entry job that required a $300 equipment fee, which she only discovered was fraudulent after the email stopped coming, and each blow chipped away at her belief that she would ever stand on solid ground again. The lowest point came one icy February night when she opened her banking app to find her checking account at -$317, the red numbers glowing like an accusation, and she sank onto her bed, feeling the weight of every mistake, every heartbreak, every unfair twist of fate pressing down until she could barely breathe. And yet, strangely, that night became a turning point, because when she looked over at Ava asleep on the couch, after insisting Mom take the bed, Marissa realized she wasn't alone in this fight. She had a daughter who believed in her, neighbors and friends who cared about her, and a stubborn, buried strength she had forgotten she possessed. Over the next month she contacted a non-profit debt counselor who helped her build a manageable payment plan, cutting her interest in half. She enrolled in a free night course in bookkeeping at the community college, encouraged by Jess and funded by a small scholarship, and she slowly started to feel her life reassemble piece by fragile piece, like a mosaic made from everything that had broken her. By the time summer warmed the Ohio air, Marissa had secured a better job as an accounting assistant at a small logistics company, bringing in steady income, enough to keep up with the payment plan and even save $50 a week. And though she still dealt with the emotional aftermath of Daniel's betrayal, especially on the days Ava returned from her father's house quiet and withdrawn, she no longer felt hollow. Instead she felt rebuilt, reshaped by every hardship, softened and strengthened all at once. Her friends celebrated her new job with homemade cupcakes, Ava hugged her tight enough to crack ribs, and even Rita cried, whispering, "You made it, sweetheart," and for the first time since her life had fallen apart, Marissa believed she truly had. And so, on an ordinary Sunday evening, as she and Ava sat on the porch watching fireflies and sharing cheap ice cream, Marissa felt a peace she hadn't known in years, a deep breath of relief, and though she still carried debts and scars and memories she wished she didn't, she also carried hope, steady, gentle, and real, and she realized that peace didn't come from a perfect life, but from surviving the imperfect one and still choosing to move forward, hand in hand with the people who mattered most. In the months that followed that peaceful summer evening, Marissa found herself adjusting to a version of life she had never imagined but was slowly learning to appreciate, one shaped less by fear and frantic survival and more by deliberate steps toward stability. And though she still woke some nights with the old panic fluttering in her chest, memories of overdue notices, silence after job interviews, the ache of betrayal, she also woke to small victories, the quiet hum of a refrigerator full of groceries she'd bought without counting every dollar, the warmth of a home that no longer felt like it was slipping from her grasp, and the steady comfort of knowing she could pay the bills on time. Her new job at the logistics company turned out to be more than just employment. It became a space where she slowly remembered her own competence, where her supervisor, Michael Ruiz, a patient man in his 50s with a meticulous way of organizing paperwork, began trusting her with more tasks as he noticed her knack for numbers and her determination to learn quickly. He never pried into her personal life, never made her feel small for asking questions, and once, when she accidentally misfiled a batch of invoices and apologized profusely, he simply patted the desk and said, "We all start somewhere, Marissa. The important part is you're trying," which warmed her more than she expected because she had spent so long feeling like she was always failing. With each week she worked there, she felt pieces of her old self returning, pieces she thought had been permanently erased by the chaos of debt, betrayal, and desperation, and this growing confidence slowly began seeping into the rest of her life. Ava, now nearing 14, blossomed alongside her mother's recovery, smiling more often, laughing with friends, and even talking about trying out for the school choir, something she had once abandoned during the divorce storms. Seeing her daughter regain her spark made Marissa feel an indescribable mixture of pride and grief, knowing how much Ava had carried during the darkest moments, how she deserved a childhood free of the burdens Marissa had unintentionally placed on her shoulders. Whenever guilt threatened to pull her under again, Marissa reminded herself that love was not measured by the hardships a family endured but by how they rebuilt afterward, and in that rebuilding Ava became not just her daughter but her anchor, her reminder that hope could exist even in fractured spaces. Still, progress rarely came without setbacks. One crisp October morning, Marissa received a letter from her mortgage company informing her of a clerical error that had misapplied 3 payments, leaving her with a temporary deficit of $487, and the moment she saw the number, her body reacted as if old trauma were muscle memory, her hands shaking, her vision blurring, her breath stalling, but this time she didn't fall apart. She called the company, explained the situation calmly, and demanded they review their records. It took 3 phone calls and an emailed bank statement, but within a week the error was corrected, and when the confirmation letter arrived, she held it to her chest, trembling with relief, shocked by her own strength. Even more surprising were the friendships that continued to grow around her. Jess from the grocery store remained a persistent presence, stopping by after shifts with takeout cartons, insisting that Marissa try new foods because a woman rebuilding her life deserves flavor, and Rita often shuffled over with her knitting bag, settling into Marissa's living room to talk about everything from neighborhood gossip to her late husband, sometimes offering advice so blunt it made Marissa laugh through tears. Together, these women formed a quiet safety net around her, the kind she didn't know how to ask for but desperately needed, and there were evenings when the 3 of them sat on the couch, sipping tea and talking about nothing of real importance, yet those nights warmed Marissa more than any dramatic act of rescue ever could. But the deepest emotional challenge arrived when Daniel unexpectedly reached out one chilly evening in early November, texting her for the first time in nearly a year. "Can we talk? It's about Ava." The message sent a tremor through her, one she wished she were immune to by now, and though she hesitated for nearly an hour, she eventually agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between their homes. When she walked in and saw him, looking thinner, older, his confidence noticeably cracked, she felt something strange, not longing, not anger, but a distant sadness for who they once were, and for how completely that had shattered. He explained that the woman he'd left her for had ended things, that his finances were strained, that he wanted more time with Ava but didn't know how to rebuild their relationship. He spoke as though he were looking for sympathy, as though pain were a competition he expected to win, but Marissa listened quietly, offering only factual updates about their daughter and refusing to step into the emotional role he seemed to hope for. When he hinted at rekindling something for the sake of family, she felt a flicker of the old wounds but also a surge of clarity. She told him gently but firmly that her healing was not a resource he could use to repair his own regrets, that she wished him well but her life no longer had space for the instability he brought. Walking out of that cafe, she felt an ache, but also a profound sense of liberation, as though she had finally severed the last thread tying her to the pain he'd caused. As winter settled in, Marissa found herself embracing routines that once felt impossible, cooking dinners without worrying about the cost of each ingredient, studying for her night classes with a cup of cocoa beside her, and saving small amounts that slowly grew into a modest emergency fund. On Christmas Eve, friends gathered at her home, Rita with her knitted scarves, Jess with sparkling cranberry drinks, and even Michael stopping by with a tin of cookies from the office party, all laughing and sharing stories while snow softened the world outside. Ava performed a song she'd been practicing for choir tryouts, her voice trembling but beautiful, and the moment she finished, everyone applauded, tears glistening in Marissa's eyes as she realized she was witnessing not just her daughter's growth but her own life expanding into something hopeful, something whole. She wasn't free from debt yet, but she was no longer drowning. She wasn't wealthy, but she wasn't scrambling for survival. She wasn't healed from every heartbreak, but she no longer bled from old wounds. As the clock edged toward midnight, she stepped outside to breathe in the cold, crisp air, snowflakes catching in her hair, and she whispered a thank you, to the universe, to herself, to anyone or anything that had helped her keep going, and in that moment, she felt the quiet truth settle into her bones. She had not just survived her pain, she had transformed because of it, finding a peace deeper than she ever thought possible. Winter eventually loosened its grip, and as the first hints of spring swept through Ohio, Marissa felt something inside her loosen as well, as if the thaw and the world around her mirrored the slow melting of the last fears she carried, though she still had long stretches of self-doubt, moments when she questioned whether her progress was real or temporary, whether the stability she was building could hold, whether one unexpected bill or one mistake could undo everything again. But each time these thoughts crept in, she reminded herself of all she had already survived, all she had rebuilt with nothing but grit and the quiet support of the people who had stood by her. Her work at the logistics company became more meaningful as Michael gradually increased her responsibilities, trusting her with monthly reconciliations and vendor communication, and when she completed her bookkeeping course with a final grade of 95, he congratulated her with a small office celebration, balloons taped to her monitor, a slice of bakery cake, and a card signed by the whole team, even those she barely interacted with, which filled her chest with a warmth so unfamiliar she almost didn't recognize it as pride. Ava attended the celebration too, standing a little taller than she had months earlier, her hair curled and her eyes shining with the joy of seeing her mother cherished by others, and later that evening she hugged Marissa tightly and said, "Mom, you look like you belong there," and the way she said it, softly, sincerely, made tears prick at Marissa's eyes because belonging had been something she hadn't felt in years. But life, as always, carried complexity alongside progress. One afternoon in April, Marissa received a call from her bank notifying her of suspicious activity on her debit card, 3 transactions totaling $376, all from a subscription service she had never heard of, and for a moment panic washed over her, the old fear that scams were waiting around every corner. But instead of spiraling, she took a deep breath, listened to the representative, and followed every step to dispute the charges. It took 5 days for the funds to be returned, but the moment she saw the corrected balance, she felt a fierce, almost defiant sense of empowerment. She had been hit again, but she hadn't crumbled. When she told Jess about it over coffee, her friend grinned and said, "Look at you, handling chaos like a pro," and Marissa laughed. Not the brittle laugh of someone pretending she was okay, but a genuine one, the kind that loosened her shoulders and reminded her that she wasn't who she used to be. Even so, the incident stirred something deeper, a realization that her trauma from past scams still lingered, tugging at her trust and leaving her wary of every unfamiliar email and every too friendly advertisement. But instead of avoiding the issue, she sought guidance from a local community center offering free financial literacy workshops. The classes weren't glamorous, they were held in a stuffy room with flickering fluorescent lights, but they taught her how to recognize legitimate financial communication, how to secure her accounts, and most importantly, how to advocate for herself without fear. With each session she attended, she felt the weight of past mistakes lifting, replaced not by shame but by understanding. Meanwhile, her relationship with Ava continued to evolve, growing into something more open and tender than before. They often spent evenings walking the neighborhood together, sharing stories about their days, talking about Ava's hopes for high school and Marissa's tentative dreams of one day starting her own small bookkeeping service. Sometimes they would pass by the park where families gathered, and Ava would ask quiet questions about the past, questions she had been too young or too scared to ask when everything was falling apart. Did Mom know Dad was cheating earlier? Did she ever think about leaving sooner? Did she ever stop loving him completely? Each question landed softly but deeply, and Marissa answered with honesty, explaining that love didn't vanish overnight and that staying with someone who breaks you doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. These conversations, though painful, strengthened the bond between them, weaving trust where old wounds had once sat like silent barriers. And on the evenings when Ava grew emotional, because teenage years were heavy enough without the added burden of a broken family, Marissa held her and whispered the same words she once wished someone had said to her, "You're safe. We're okay. We're building something better." Yet the most unexpected development came from herself. She started allowing joy back into her life, little by little, in ways she had once deemed frivolous. She bought a second-hand bike and began riding on Saturday mornings, feeling the wind against her face, feeling strong, present, alive. She joined a book club at the library, making new friends who didn't know her history and welcomed her simply as Marissa, the woman who loved suspense novels and chamomile tea. She started saving not just for emergencies but for goals, real ones, hopeful ones, like a weekend trip with Ava or a small upgrade to their living room furniture. The first time she bought something without guilt, a $12 scented candle that reminded her of ocean air, she almost cried in the checkout line, because it symbolized something so much larger, the return of permission to enjoy life. However, not every step forward was simple. In early June, Daniel called again, this time to inform her he had missed child support for the month due to the loss of his own job. The conversation reopened wounds she thought had scarred over. His voice, always shifting between self-pity and defensiveness, triggered memories of arguments, tears, and the exhaustion of trying to hold together a marriage built on cracks she couldn't repair. This time, though, she didn't let him off easily. She reminded him of his legal responsibilities, of the years she had carried the weight alone, and she firmly told him that her compassion did not excuse neglect. She hung up shaken but proud, and later, when she told Rita what happened, the older woman squeezed her hand and said, "Strength isn't never breaking, sweetheart. It's knowing you can stand back up." Marissa took those words to heart, repeating them often on the days when exhaustion threatened to pull her back into old patterns. And there were moments, unexpected, fleeting moments, when happiness surprised her so deeply she didn't know what to do with it. Like the evening in mid-June when Michael pulled her aside at work and told her that, due to her excellent performance, they were promoting her to full-time with benefits and a salary increase to $48,000 a year. The room spun for a moment as she processed his words, and she had to grip the edge of the desk to steady herself, tears burning her eyes not because of the money itself but because of what it represented: stability, dignity, possibility. When she told Ava that night, they danced around the kitchen like two kids, laughing breathlessly, their shadows stretching across the walls like proof of how far they had come. Marissa slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep she hadn't felt since before her world fell apart, the kind that comes when fear finally loosens its hold. By the time July settled warm and bright over the city, Marissa realized something quietly miraculous: she no longer felt defined by her struggles. They were part of her, yes, etched into her memory, shaping her empathy, guiding her choices, but they were no longer the whole story. Her life was no longer a tragedy bruised by debt and betrayal. It was a story of rebuilding, of reclaiming, of redefining not just her future but her sense of self. And on a soft summer night, as she and Ava lay on a blanket in their backyard watching constellations flicker above them, Marissa felt a peace she once believed she would never find again, steady, vibrant, and earned through every step she had taken out of the darkness. Summer's warmth settled into the rhythms of their lives, and as July stretched forward with long sunsets and humid afternoons, Marissa felt the world slowing just enough for her to catch her breath, to look around and realize how different life felt from the year before, how the constant tightness in her chest had eased, how her mornings no longer began with dread but with a quiet sense of purpose. At the logistics company, she eased into her new full-time role with cautious pride, mastering new tasks, training new hires, and finding a strange satisfaction in balancing ledgers and solving tiny financial puzzles that once would have overwhelmed her. Her colleagues became more than co-workers. They became a steady constellation of support: Michael's patient mentorship, Dana, a soft-spoken single father who shared lunchtime jokes, and Claire, an older woman with a motherly streak who often slipped homemade granola bars onto Marissa's desk. For the first time in years, Marissa felt woven into something bigger than survival. Still, she never forgot the fragile nature of healing, and there were evenings when exhaustion pressed its full weight against her shoulders, nights when she stared at bills, afraid to believe she could truly manage them. But each time doubt crept in, she opened her budgeting notebook, saw her progress, the shrinking debt, the slowly growing savings, and reminded herself that she was no longer living from crisis to crisis. She was rebuilding slowly, with intention, and every steady month felt like a small miracle she refused to take for granted. Ava flourished alongside her. By early August she had joined the school choir, made new friends, and started talking excitedly about high school clubs and electives, her voice bubbling with the kind of optimism Marissa once feared she had unintentionally stolen from her child. They spent many summer evenings walking by the river, talking about crushes and classes and life dreams, and one night Ava admitted she wanted someday to study psychology, so people don't feel alone the way we did for a while. The confession broke something soft inside Marissa, a bittersweet ache of pride and sorrow, and she hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, "You're going to help so many people." On weekends, they visited festivals and farmers markets, something they couldn't afford the year before, and even though they were careful with spending, Marissa always made sure to buy Ava one small treat: homemade lemonade, a bracelet, a book, because she wanted her daughter to finally experience abundance, even in small doses. Yet amid the joy, occasional shadows still lingered. Once, while scrolling for freelance bookkeeping jobs to bring in a little extra income, Marissa came across an offer that seemed too perfect: high pay, flexible hours, and for a moment she almost clicked apply. But something in her gut tightened, an instinct honed by the pain of previous scams, and when she researched the company, she found warnings plastered all over consumer forums. Instead of spiraling into shame or fear like she once would have, she closed the tab calmly and whispered, "Not this time," proud of herself in a way only someone who has been burned before can understand. Her growing confidence led her to take new steps, small but meaningful. She joined a local women's support group recommended by one of her financial workshop leaders, a group made up of mothers, survivors, widows, and women trying to rebuild after setbacks of every kind. The first meeting terrified her. She sat stiffly in a folding chair, hands clasped, convinced she didn't belong. But when the women began sharing their stories, tales of eviction, emotional abuse, toxic relationships, medical debt, something in her cracked open. These women weren't failures, they were fighters. And when her turn came, her voice trembled as she revealed the things she had carried in silence: the infidelity, the layoffs, the scams, the shame. Instead of judgment, she was met with nods, murmurs of empathy, and one woman named Tessa, who reached over and squeezed her hand, saying, "You're not alone here." That gesture brought tears rushing to her eyes, and from that night on, Marissa attended every meeting, sometimes speaking, sometimes listening, always finding herself strengthened by the simple truth that community could heal wounds isolation had deepened. As August waned, life threw her a curve she didn't expect. One afternoon Michael called her into his office, not his usual calm tone, but something heavier, and she braced herself instinctively, fearing bad news. Instead, he explained that the company was undergoing restructuring and that while her position was secure, a few roles in her department were being eliminated. The fear that shot through her was immediate, visceral, her body remembering, too clearly, what it felt like to lose everything in a single envelope. She fought to keep her breathing steady, nodding as he explained, but her palms sweated, her stomach knotted, and for a split second she felt herself slipping back into that cold November afternoon from years ago. But then he added, "You're one of our strongest assets, Marissa. We're keeping you because we see how much you bring to this place," and those words hit her like a life raft thrown into stormy water. She exhaled shakily, thanking him, and when she returned to her desk, Claire placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You're safe here." The reassurance loosened something deep inside her. That evening, when she told Ava what happened, her daughter hugged her tightly and said, "Mom, you deserve to feel secure," and hearing those words from her own child nearly unraveled her with gratitude. But stability wasn't the only gift summer brought. In early September, during a support group meeting, Marissa met someone new, Ethan, a soft-spoken volunteer who helped with financial education sessions. He was in his mid-40s, gentle-eyed, with an easy laugh and a calm presence that didn't demand anything from her. He introduced himself after the meeting, complimenting her insight during the discussion about rebuilding credit, and though the interaction was brief, it lingered in Marissa's mind in a way she didn't expect. She wasn't looking for love, she had sworn off romance for at least a few more years, but Ethan's presence felt safe. Familiar. Not like someone trying to fill a void, but someone who recognized it because he carried his own scars. Over the next few meetings, they talked more, about budgeting strategies, about kids, about their shared love of old movies, and each conversation left her simultaneously warmed and terrified. She wasn't sure she could trust herself again, wasn't sure she deserved something new, something gentle. But she also didn't shut the door. She let the possibility linger quietly, cautiously. Yet even with these new developments, Marissa remained focused on her primary goal, fully paying off her remaining debt, which by early fall had dropped to $9,800, less than half of what it had once been. Each payment she made felt like reclaiming another piece of herself, another corner of her future. She created colorful progress charts with Ava, celebrating each milestone with homemade brownies or movie nights on the couch. The process turned something once terrifying into something empowering. And through it all, she continued teaching Ava the financial lessons she wished she'd learned earlier: how to save, how to avoid predatory lenders, how to recognize scams, how to speak up when something felt wrong. Watching Ava absorb these lessons with maturity beyond her years made Marissa feel like she was breaking generational patterns of silence, fear, and financial instability. They were building a foundation that would last. By late September, as leaves began turning gold and a new school year started, Marissa realized something quietly miraculous: she no longer measured her life by losses. She measured it by resilience, by small steps forward, by the people who had stayed, by the strength she had forged through surviving the moments that once nearly destroyed her. And one crisp evening, as she and Ava sat on the porch sipping warm cider, the first chill of autumn brushing their skin, Marissa looked out over their quiet neighborhood: kids riding bikes, porch lights flickering on, the sky streaked with soft pink, and she felt a deep, steady peace settle into her, a peace not born of perfection but of perseverance. She wasn't done healing, not yet, maybe not ever, but she was no longer fighting alone, no longer drowning, no longer defined by the pain she had endured. She was, for the first time in a long time, truly living. October arrived with its gentle chill and soft-spoken promise of change, and as leaves drifted down in shades of amber and rushed, Marissa found herself entering a season of reflection she hadn't anticipated, one where the steady routines she'd built allowed old sorrows and new hopes to coexist without overwhelming her. Her days at work became smoother, almost rhythmic: morning coffees shared with Claire, quick conversations with Dana about their kids' homework battles, and the quiet satisfaction of completing reports that once intimidated her. Michael frequently praised her growing skill set, even hinting that she might be considered for an assistant manager position in the next year, and though hearing those words filled her with disbelief, a small flutter of pride bloomed in her chest. Evenings remained sacred: warm dinners with Ava, laughter spilling across their dining table, quiet hours spent studying personal finance videos or reviewing her debt progress. Slowly, almost shyly, she had begun to believe that she truly deserved this stability. But life had a way of testing newfound peace, and one crisp Friday morning, as she left for work, she found a letter taped to her door, an envelope with her name scrawled hastily in handwriting she instantly recognized: Daniel's. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated to open it, pacing the small porch before finally tearing the seal. Inside was a shaky apology, 3 paragraphs of remorse that felt half confession, half plea, explaining that he was struggling financially, emotionally, and felt guilty for how he had treated her. He wrote that he admired her strength, that he missed the family they once had, that he hoped she might someday find space to forgive him. Reading his words stirred a storm of emotions: anger at his audacity, sadness for what they once were, and a surprising sense of closure she didn't realize she still needed. She folded the letter carefully, not out of tenderness but finality, and tucked it away, not to revisit, but to remind herself of how far she had come. Later that weekend, during her support group meeting, she shared the experience with the circle. Ethan listened quietly, his brows drawn with concern, and afterward he gently asked if she was okay. She found comfort in his steady gaze and admitted she wasn't sure how to feel: relieved, shaken, strangely validated, but that she knew she wasn't slipping backward. He nodded, offering only, "Closure often looks nothing like we expect," which made her smile softly because he understood her without demanding more of her than she could give. Their friendship deepened over the next few weeks, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, meaningful ways. He began sitting beside her during meetings, walking her to her car afterward, sharing stories of his own past struggles: a painful divorce, a business failure, years of rebuilding from the ground up. His vulnerability didn't frighten her, it encouraged hers. Yet she remained cautious, her heart still bore the bruises of betrayal, and she refused to rush into any new relationship, no matter how gentle or promising it seemed. Still, she couldn't deny the growing warmth she felt whenever his name appeared on her phone or when he laughed at one of her dry jokes. One evening, when he asked if she and Ava might like to join him and his daughter for a small fall festival, she surprised herself by saying yes. The outing was simple: rides, caramel apples, a hay maze, but it felt monumental, like a step into a world she once believed she'd lost access to. Watching Ava and Ethan's daughter, Lily, giggle their way through the corn maze while she and Ethan trailed behind, Marissa felt something tender and cautious unfurl inside her. She wasn't falling in love, at least not yet, but she was allowing the possibility of joy. But even as her personal life blossomed, new challenges emerged. One afternoon in late October, she received notice that her renter's insurance premium was increasing by $87 per month due to neighborhood crime rate adjustments, a sudden jump that threatened to destabilize her carefully planned budget. For a moment, panic clawed at her chest, but instead of spiraling, she reached out to her financial workshop mentor, who guided her through comparing policies, challenging the rate increase, and ultimately switching to a more affordable option. The process was stressful, time-consuming, and full of bureaucratic frustration, but Marissa finished it feeling victorious, proof she could navigate the unexpected without unraveling. Ava noticed her resilience too. "You didn't even cry this time," she teased gently one evening as they cooked dinner together. Marissa tousled her hair and laughed. "I'm learning," she said, and she meant it deeply. Yet life wasn't without heartache. In early November, tragedy struck their small community when Claire, sweet, motherly Claire, suffered a stroke and passed away within days. The news hit the entire office like a breaking wave, but it shattered Marissa's heart in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Claire had been one of the first people to treat her like she belonged, one of the voices that had steadied her during moments of doubt. At the funeral, surrounded by co-workers and Claire's family, Marissa cried with a depth she hadn't expected, tears not just of grief, but of gratitude for the brief but profound impact Claire had made on her life. In the following weeks, the office felt quieter, heavier, and Marissa found herself leaving small notes of encouragement on co-workers' desks, the same way Claire had often encouraged her. She realized grief had changed her, not by hardening her, but by widening the space in her heart for compassion. Thanksgiving approached, bringing with it a blend of melancholy and warmth. This would be the first holiday season where she didn't feel the sharp sting of scarcity or heartbreak. Wanting to honor that shift, she invited a small circle of people to their home: Rita, Jess, Tessa, and surprisingly, Ethan and Lily. She cooked with Ava all morning, filling the house with aromas of rosemary and cinnamon, and as everyone gathered around their small dining table, laughter bubbling from every corner, Marissa felt overwhelmed by the simple abundance of community. There were no elaborate gifts, no fancy decorations, but there was presence, real, grounded, healing presence, and it moved her more deeply than she could express. During dessert, when Ethan caught her eye from across the table and offered a gentle, knowing smile, she felt her breath hitch, not with fear, but with something softer, something promising. In the weeks that followed, life continued to unfold in quiet, hopeful ways. She met her year-end financial goal, reducing her debt to $7,200, a number that once would have crushed her but now felt surmountable. She and Ava decorated their home for winter with thrift store lights and homemade ornaments. She continued meeting with her support group, finding wisdom in shared struggles. And little by little, carefully, intentionally, she let her guard down around Ethan. They began exchanging texts throughout the day, meeting for coffee after group meetings, sharing stories about their kids, their fears, their dreams. It was slow, gentle, nothing like the whirlwind of her marriage. And that was exactly why it felt safe. One snowy evening in December, as she walked out of the support group building, she slipped on an icy patch and nearly fell, only for Ethan to catch her arm with a soft laugh. "I've got you," he said, and something about the way he said it, quiet, steady, without expectation, softened a part of her she thought had closed forever. She looked up at him, snowflakes gathering in her hair, and for a moment time felt suspended. She didn't kiss him. He didn't ask. They simply stood there, holding on to one another, and the world felt still, warm, healing. And as she drove home that night, Christmas lights twinkling through the snow, Ava singing softly beside her, Marissa realized something profound. She had not only rebuilt a life, she had rebuilt herself, stronger, wiser, still tender, but no longer breakable. And though her journey wasn't finished, she finally felt ready for whatever came next. January settled in with a cold that felt almost ceremonial, as if the world itself were pausing to acknowledge the transition Marissa had been quietly undergoing, and as she stepped into the new year with Ava by her side and a heart no longer weighted down by dread, she found herself reflecting on how drastically her life had shifted, not in sudden leaps, but in slow, patient steps that had reshaped her without her noticing. The first days of the year brought their usual pressures: insurance renewals, school fees, winter utility bills that always seemed intent on testing her budget. But this time, instead of spiraling into fear, she sat at the dining table with her laptop and her planner, breathing steadily as she mapped out payment schedules and reevaluated expenses. The confidence she felt wasn't arrogance, it was earned, paved by nights of doubt, days of learning, and the support of people who had helped her back onto her feet. She still had debt, $7,200 a number she intended to conquer before year's end, but even that felt manageable, something she could chip away at instead of drown beneath. At work, she stepped into the new year with increased responsibility, handling vendor audits and assisting with year-end reporting, tasks she once believed were out of her reach. Michael often stopped by her desk with a nod of approval, recognizing not only her efficiency but the quiet dedication she carried. Her co-workers treated her with a respect she had grown brave enough to accept, and on the days when the office felt heavy with winter gloom, she found herself being the one to brighten it, just as Claire once had, leaving small notes on desks or bringing in muffins she and Ava baked together. Meanwhile, her connection with Ethan continued to unfold in a slow, careful dance neither of them rushed. They texted most mornings, simple things like, "Hope your day goes smoothly," or "Bundle up out there," and met for coffee every other week after support group meetings. Sometimes their conversations were light, full of jokes about parenting, work frustrations, or the absurdity of adulthood. Other times they drifted into deeper waters: regret, fear, the things they still carried. But even in those vulnerable moments, there was no pressure, no expectation. He remained consistent, gentle, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. She found his steadiness comforting in ways that startled her. She had never known love, if that was what this slowly becoming thing was, could feel peaceful instead of consuming. Still, she kept her boundaries firm. When he suggested they try a weekend lunch together, just the two of them, her first instinct was to panic, her heart racing with memories of misplaced trust and painful endings. But she breathed through it, reminded herself that fear was not danger, and agreed. The lunch was quiet, warm, easy, filled with thoughtful conversation and a comfort she couldn't quite explain. When he walked her to her car afterward, he didn't reach for her hand, didn't try to kiss her, he simply smiled and thanked her for the company, and that small act of restraint made her heart expand with a gratitude that felt almost sacred. But even amidst new connections and new confidence, winter found ways to test her. In late January, she received a letter from the IRS notifying her of a processing delay for her tax return due to a discrepancy, an issue involving her previous employer's outdated records. The moment she read the words, her throat tightened, fear rising like a familiar tide. Old memories of financial chaos slammed into her chest, and for a few minutes she sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. Ava, noticing her pale face, came to sit beside her, gently asking what was wrong. Marissa explained, her voice shaking, expecting panic, but instead, Ava placed a hand over hers and said, "It's okay, Mom. We'll figure it out. You always do." Hearing her daughter echo the reassurance she once needed most was enough to ground her. The next morning she took a deep breath, called the IRS, and spent nearly an hour navigating automated menus and hold music before speaking to a representative who explained that it was only an administrative issue and would be resolved without penalty. When she hung up, she felt shaky but victorious. She had faced the fear instead of letting it swallow her. February brought unexpected warmth in the form of small celebrations. Her debt dropped below $6,500, a milestone she marked by cooking a special dinner for her and Ava, pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, and the cheap sparkling apple cider they reserved for meaningful moments. Ava beamed at the table, raising her glass and toasting, "To Mom, who doesn't quit," and the sweetness of that moment carved itself into Marissa's heart. Around the same time, Ava made the school choir's competitive group, a dream she had nurtured quietly for months. Marissa attended the first winter performance with tears in her eyes, holding a bouquet of small yellow flowers that Ava called embarrassingly cute. After the show, as they walked through the chilly parking lot, laughing and shivering, Marissa felt a swelling sense of pride, not just in her daughter, but in the life they were creating together. Yet with joy came grief's subtle reminders. In early March, Jess sat Marissa down after work and shared news that her young son needed a medical procedure their insurance wouldn't fully cover. Jess, usually so upbeat, looked worn and fragile, and without hesitation, Marissa pressed $100 into her hands, not because she had extra, but because she knew what it felt like to be drowning, and because Jess had once carried her through her darkest hours. Jess cried, hugging her fiercely. "You're a blessing," she whispered, and Marissa realized that giving, even when it stretched her, reinforced how far she had come, from the woman sobbing over negative balances to someone capable of helping others. Spring crept in slowly, bringing unpredictable rains and fragile blossoms, and with it came new beginnings Marissa hadn't expected. One afternoon, after a support group meeting, Ethan nervously asked if she'd allow him to take her on a real date. Not a coffee, not a meeting hangout, but something where we admit it's a date. His voice trembled slightly, and the vulnerability in his eyes stirred something warm inside her. For a moment, fear whispered its familiar warnings. People betray, people leave, people change. But then another voice, stronger, steadier, reminded her of everything she'd endured, everything she'd rebuilt, and how careful, consistent, and kind he had been. So she said yes. Their date was simple, a small Italian restaurant with flickering candles and soft violin music, but the conversation flowed effortlessly. They laughed. They teased. They shared stories of their pasts with gentle honesty. And at the end of the night, standing beside her car beneath a street lamp's warm glow, Ethan asked softly, "May I hug you?" She nodded, and as he wrapped his arms around her, warm, steady, respectful, she felt her heart loosen in a way it hadn't in years. Not broken. Not guarded. Just open. On the drive home, with the city lights reflecting softly in the rain-streaked windshield and Ava waiting at home with her curious smile, Marissa felt a deep, grounded peace settle into her chest. She had not rushed into new love, she had grown into it. She was not healed because she'd found someone new, she had found someone new because she had healed. And as she pulled into her driveway, feeling the soft pulse of hope in her veins, she whispered into the quiet night, "I'm finally ready." Spring unfolded in soft bursts of color and hesitant warmth, and as April rolled in with blooming dogwoods and gentle rains tapping against the windows, Marissa felt as though the world was mirroring her own slow awakening, an emergence from years of survival into something that finally resembled living. After her first official date with Ethan, she was cautious but hopeful, allowing the connection to deepen at a pace that honored both her fears and her growth. They settled into a quiet rhythm, meeting for dinner once a week, exchanging thoughtful texts, sharing stories about their children and the strange ways life could wound and mend. She found comfort in the steadiness of him, in his patient way of listening, in the absence of pressure in every moment. Yet, she also held firmly to her independence, reminding herself that love, if it came, would be an addition to her life, not a replacement for the self-worth she had fought so hard to reclaim. At work, spring brought its own shifts. The logistics company expanded its client list, which meant more responsibilities, more long days, and occasionally more stress than she liked to admit, but there was pride woven into the chaos, pride in the trust Michael placed in her, pride in the way coworkers asked for her help, pride in the fact that she no longer felt like an outsider waiting for disaster to strike. One Thursday morning, Michael called her into his office and surprised her with the news that she would be leading the implementation of a new financial software system, a task he said required someone with strong instincts and a calm head under pressure. The compliment stunned her, the woman who once cried over late fees and collection calls. She left his office with trembling hands and a buzzing heart, realizing that she had become someone she once could barely imagine. Outside of work, Ava continued to thrive in ways that filled Marissa with awe. She had grown into a vibrant, expressive teenager who balanced humor with surprising emotional wisdom, and the choir performances, the school projects, the late-night talks over popcorn, they became threads stitching the two of them even closer together. But spring also brought new challenges. One afternoon, Ava came home with red eyes and a trembling voice after overhearing her father on the phone with someone complaining about having to pay child support. The moment Marissa saw her daughter's tear-streaked face, something sharp twisted in her chest. They sat on the couch together, Ava curled into her side, and Marissa soothed her with steady words, explaining gently that her father's bitterness had nothing to do with her value or her worth. It still hurt, though, watching Ava carry pain she shouldn't have to, and later that night, after Ava fell asleep, Marissa cried quietly into a pillow, mourning the father-daughter bond that had been fractured by choices she couldn't control. She vowed silently to create enough love, enough safety, enough stability to fill the gaps left behind. Her debt continued to shrink, $5,400 by mid-April, and each payment brought a sense of triumph she savored slowly, reminding herself how far she had come from the woman drowning beneath overdue notices. To celebrate the milestone, she and Ava spent a Saturday deep cleaning the apartment, lighting candles, blasting music, and laughing while trying to fold laundry into shapes neither could manage. It was ordinary, simple, nothing remarkable to an outsider, but to Marissa, it felt like evidence of how profoundly her life had changed. Yet the universe, in its unending unpredictability, soon nudged her toward another test of resilience. One rainy evening, after dropping Ava at choir practice, her car's check engine light flickered on, followed by a sputtering sound that sent her heart into a panic-ridden freefall. She pulled into a gas station, hands shaking, every catastrophic what-if rushing through her mind. A broken car could unravel her budget, threaten her job stability, force her into the very spiral she'd worked so hard to escape. She called Ethan, not in a desperate plea, but because she trusted him, and he showed up within 15 minutes, umbrella in hand, calm as the rain that fell steadily around them. He examined the car with a flashlight, determined the issue was likely minor, and insisted on following her slowly to a nearby mechanic. The next morning, the mechanic confirmed it was only a loose sensor, a $78 fix instead of the nightmare she feared. When she walked out of the shop, she felt weak with relief and grateful beyond words. Ethan didn't make a big gesture about it, he simply squeezed her hand and said, "You don't have to handle everything alone anymore," and though she didn't answer right away, the warmth blooming in her chest told her that maybe, just maybe, she believed him. As May approached, the world brightened further. The logistics company held a spring appreciation luncheon, and Marissa watched from her seat as Michael publicly acknowledged her contributions, praising her leadership on the new software project. Her cheeks flushed as her co-workers applauded, and in that moment she felt something she hadn't felt in years, seen, valued, proud without guilt. After the luncheon, Dana joked that she'd soon be running the place, and for the first time, Marissa didn't dismiss the idea as impossible. Her confidence seeped into other areas of life too. She began researching additional bookkeeping certifications, exploring the possibility of freelance work on the side, dreaming, quietly but boldly, of eventual financial freedom. On weekends, she and Ava took long drives with the windows down, music loud, the wind whipping through their hair like laughter. They picnicked at parks, planted flowers outside their apartment, and made new traditions out of small moments, Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights with thrifted DVDs, deep conversations on their worn but beloved couch. But spring also held bittersweet reminders of what she had endured. One afternoon in early May, she ran into an old coworker from her insurance firm at the grocery store, a woman who had once dismissed her concerns during layoffs. The woman recognized Marissa, complimented her, and asked casually what she was doing these days, a question that once would have filled Marissa with shame. Instead, she stood tall and answered confidently, sharing her new position, her progress, the stability she had built. The woman's surprised expression felt like a final victory over a chapter that once buried her. Marissa left the store with her head high, her heart steady. Through all of this, her connection with Ethan, careful, patient, hopeful, deepened. There was no dramatic whirlwind, no rushing into declarations. Instead, there were long conversations on park benches, laughter over embarrassing childhood stories, shared meals where silence felt as comfortable as words. One evening, as they walked side by side along a riverside trail lit by golden sunset, he paused and gently took her hand, not asking permission this time, but offering a silent question she felt ready to answer. She intertwined her fingers with his, and the world around them softened into something warm and safe. They didn't talk about the future yet, didn't define anything too quickly, but in the quiet between them, something real was growing, something built on trust instead of fear. As school neared its end for Ava, choir concerts and final exams peppered their schedules, and life hummed with a busy but joyful momentum. There were still tough days, nights when Marissa doubted herself, mornings when bills felt too heavy, moments when memories of the past tugged at old wounds, but the difference now was clear. She no longer faced any of it alone, and she no longer believed that hardship meant she was failing. She had learned to meet fear with logic, stress with breath, setbacks with resilience. She was no longer the woman defined by her heartbreak. She was a woman defined by her comeback. And one warm evening as May melted into June, she found herself standing on her porch with Ava beside her and Ethan at her steps, listening to the hum of cicadas as the sun dipped below the horizon. The peace she felt wasn't loud or triumphant, it was quiet, steady, deep. A peace that said, "You made it through. You're still becoming. You're allowed to be happy now, June arrived with a warmth that felt almost symbolic, as though the sun itself had chosen to shine a little brighter on the life Marissa had spent the last 2 years rebuilding, and with the arrival of summer she found herself moving more confidently, more freely, as if shedding the last remnants of the heaviness she had once believed would cling to her forever. The final day of school came quickly, bringing a rush of excitement to Ava, who bounded through the apartment door waving her report card with pride, her voice breathless from joy as she announced she had earned a nearly perfect GPA and been selected as a section leader for next year's choir. Marissa hugged her tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude that her daughter was thriving despite everything they had endured, and later that evening they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a movie that made them laugh so hard they cried. But beneath the joy of summer's arrival was a quiet tension that Marissa felt growing in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and fear, because she knew that if her relationship with Ethan continued the way it had been, a new conversation was coming, one she wasn't entirely sure she felt ready for. They had been dating steadily for nearly 3 months, slowly weaving their lives together in a way that felt intentional and careful, and though she adored the warmth he brought into her life, she still carried the scars of betrayal, financial ruin, and emotional devastation, the kind of scars that didn't disappear just because someone new loved her gently. Yet Ethan never rushed, never pushed, he simply continued showing up in ways she once thought men didn't know how to, checking her car before road trips, dropping off a smoothie on days she worked late, sending goodnight texts that never demanded anything of her. And because of that steadiness, she found herself softening even more than she expected. One hot afternoon in mid-June, when she returned home from work exhausted after dealing with a miscommunication between vendors, she walked into the apartment to find Ava sitting at the table with a concerned look on her face, biting her lip the way she always did when something weighed on her mind. Marissa set down her keys, immediately alert. Ava hesitated before admitting that Daniel had forgotten to pick her up for a planned dinner and didn't answer her calls for nearly an hour. The disappointment in Ava's voice hurt deeper than any anger Marissa could have felt, and she sat down, gathering her daughter into her arms as Ava cried quietly into her shoulder. They didn't talk badly about Daniel. Marissa refused to feed bitterness, but she reassured Ava that her father's failures were not reflections of her worth. Later that night, when Ava went to bed, Marissa sat alone at the table, feeling the familiar ache of wishing she could protect her daughter from every disappointment, every wound. She texted Ethan, not to vent, but because she knew he would understand, and within minutes he offered to meet her outside for a short walk. They strolled under the street lamps, the night air warm and thick, and as she recounted what happened, he listened in the quiet, steady way he always did. When she grew emotional, he didn't offer platitudes, he simply squeezed her hand and said, "You're doing right by her. Love doesn't fail just because someone else does." The words hit her so deeply she had to blink back tears. By late June, her debt had dropped again, to $4,800, a number that made her pause in disbelief as she stood in line at the bank depositing an extra payment from her small freelance bookkeeping job she'd just begun. She had only one client so far, a friend of a coworker who needed help organizing their small business expenses, but earning even a little extra on her own terms felt empowering in a way she couldn't fully explain. She was doing it. She was actually doing it. Another milestone came at work as well. The logistics software implementation she'd been leading concluded successfully, and Michael informed her that upper management had taken notice of her leadership throughout the process. Though nothing was official.